The sugya here on Daf Vav Amid Beis was very perplexing to the Rishonim because the case of Shabbos is a case of what we call a losa seviese. The Torah on the one hand says kol malach lo sasu, and at the same time the Torah says bayom hashvi tishbos. Now, in the case of Avoras Bas Kohen b'Shabbos, if we violate the Shabbos for the sake of the mitzvah of Vahumas, that's incumbent upon Beis Din to implement the death penalty, then what you have is, in effect, is a case of an essay that's overriding both a losaseh and an essay, the losaseh of Lotasa Kol Malacha and the essay of Tishma. And the Gemara establishes in a number of different sugyas in Shas that ein essay docha lo sevi essay. So therefore, what was the havamina that you would override the Shabbos for the sake of the mitzvah of vahumas when it's ein essay docha lo sevi essay? And on the contrary, maybe we should derive from here that essay is docha lo sevi essay. So the Ramban offers the following answer: that the Gemara could have actually objected with that same pircha. But adifi minei parach, we have a principle of adifi minei. When the Gemara could have had one of two possible objections, the Gemara chooses one which is considered adifi minei, if it's more powerful or more fundamental. And the Gemara is going to object in a more fundamental pircha. And that's going to be based again on a reinterpretation of the Brisa, namely Rav Shimi, and we're not dealing with Esei Dochalos at all. So instead of going into the details, well, would this be and qualify as Esei Dochalos or not, with all the nuances and the rules and regulations that govern Esei Dochalos, the Gemara doesn't even bother with that. The Gemara says we're not dealing with Esei Dochalos. We're dealing with a situation where the mitzvah of Misa, Lahamis, is greater than avoda, and we're going to take this Kohen off of the Mizbeach in order to put him to death, and avoda itself overrides the Shabbos, is greater than the Shabbos. The Ritva, however, gives another answer, and he says the following: that, and I'm not sure if this is philosophical or there's a way of, given the background, there's a way of defining the Ritva in halachic terms. It says the following: Svaras hahavamina, what the Gemara was thinking now in the Havamina was Kevan Shebisas Rishoyim Tikun La'olam Arehi Docha Afilu Ese. Meaning, when you have an essay and a losa said an essay, you can posit the essay as overriding the losas, but you're still left with another essay. And the premise is that when you have a conflict between an essay and a losas, that itself is a kind of a teku situation, and now the losas is bolstered by an essay, you can't override that essay. But if you have an essay to begin with that is meant to override a low set an essay, and that essay to begin with is a tikun l'kol ha'olam, it has some sort of an impact on the world. It's not just a private mitzvah of wearing tzitzis. We had a havamina to say that even after you set up the confrontation between that essay, which is such a great essay, and the losas, and now you're sort of at an equilibrium, and now you want to introduce the essay. No, forget about the essay. Because this essay is so great that it would certainly override even another essay, even after it was Docha Losas. And therefore he says, Hareyu Docha Filu Essay, Mekomakom Yeshluma Mikan L'Kol HaTorah Kula, Shelota Sebilvad, Nidche B'Pnei HaEssay, even if it's a Lota Sashish Bo Kares. And the essay overrides the lotas, meaning that in this particular case, the Torah says, Lo Savaru Eish, you do not implement this punishment violate the Shabbos, but elsewhere it would have overridden a lotus, even though it's a lotus at Shishbok. Fine. Now, the maskana of our sugya is that we could have logically permitted havaras eish for the sake of a humas, and that's going to teach me that although the Torah says not to do so in this case, but universally in other cases, we would override the losses. But hayamakom lahatir havaras eish k'dei lahatir es hapsila u'leshofcha lepiv shel hamachuyev sreifa bishum she'esei dochelosa af sheyesh ro kares. And now we have the objection of the Ritva and other Rishonim. Kasha. Hare avaras ubishol psila nasim shelo beidna shemixkayim esay. The ain kiyumo, the essay is not fulfilled until shas mishal mamish. Ech yidcha ha essay salos. How can we even raise a havamina that the mitzvah of humas would permit havara when the havara is executed before the execution? What do I mean? That the havara is when we burn the psila to create this molten lead, and the kiyuma mitzvah of humas is delayed until she actually perishes. If that be the case, there's no essay dochalosa. And this kasha of the Ritva and the Rinban is very similar to the previous kasha, meaning how can the Gemara even entertain the possibility? It's a very strong havamina that essay dochalosa said. First of all, it's essay against the los of the essay. That was the previous kasha. Now we have another kasha. It's not be'itna. The Tiritz Ramban, Apostle Bolamai shalo yitem psila shal ever b'toch pia nidon v'yavers ha'esh tachas ha'psila v'niteches l'toch piv v'hargasa. Now, I don't understand exactly how you would pull this off. I'm not clear of the physics of it, but we'll just repeat the words of the Ramban. The Ramban says that you take a psila, a lead piece of metal, and you put it into a mouth. Now, exactly how you do this, I don't know, because he wants to burn it and make it into molten lead while she's holding it in her mouth. So I don't know exactly. I'm not a dentist, but you'd have to really open your mouth pretty wide, like a lion, in order to put the psila of aver into her mouth, and then take a what do they call that thing that the smokers use? What do they call it? A lighter. Put the lighter somehow inside her mouth, underneath the psila, and then melt down the lead. I don't know how you could do such a thing, but the Ramban is taking this question to its extreme, and he's saying that the Havamini of Esei Dochalosa would only apply be'idna, meaning at the very moment that he's doing the streifa, at that moment she's dying. There's a simultaneity in the Averis Halav of burning the lead and killing her, which is the mitzvah. And the Ritva has this. The Rashba says, "Efsha shalotia hasreifa b'abishul apsila kodemis zman hamisa, l'fisha ein apsila niteches ela achar havara." He says, even if you can somehow orchestrate this in physics, but you still have a problem because you have to heat up the lead. And it's only after you heat up the lead that she swallows the molten lead and dies. So, ein psila niteches. At what point does the psila, right, this wick, so to speak, of lead, at what point does it become molten liquid? It's only after that, or he's got to light the fire first. If you want to have a different scenario in which you take the psila, put it into a pot, and turn on the fire under the pot, then whatever bishul hardens the psila is going to take place before it goes into a mouth. In other words, according to the Rashba's thesis, you can never orchestrate the idna in a case of sreifas paskohen. And once again, we're going to apply the rule of Adifa Minei. The Gemara could have actually objected to the Havamin of Esei Dochalosa in this scenario. But Adifa Minei, the Gemara says we're not dealing with Esei Dochalosa at all. And at this point, we quote a shita of the Magen Avraham in Simon Tov Mem Vav. The Magen Avraham is of the opinion that we don't always need, it's not an absolute rule, without any exception, be'idna. We don't always need be'idna. Sometimes we need be'idna because otherwise the essay doesn't have any power to override the lotus. If the essay is now on its own at time T1, anticipating the lotus, which is now on its own on time T2, and if there's no simultaneity, then what is going to allow the lotus to be overridden when you haven't been Mekayim the essay at the time of the lotus? But in certain cases, the essay is so powerful that it can override the lotus set even in anticipation of the lotus. So even before the implementation in actuality of the lotus, it's not being. And says the Magen Avraham, in what case, what kind of an essay has the power to override a lotus set even if it's shalom be'idna? And he answers that it's called an essay de Rabbi. Now, what that means is that you have a body that represents all of Klal Yisrael. It's not that the members of that body are actually obligated to the mitzvah. They're just sort of agents on behalf of the community of Israel. I mean, I'll give you an example. You have a mitzvah like Kiddush HaChodesh, and the Sanhedrin is going to decide to sanctify the month. They'll determine when is the first day of the month. You know, you may have, I'll give you a printout of the list of those who are sitting on Sanhedrin. That's not their obligation. That's the obligation upon Klal Yisrael. HaChodesh hazeh yeh lachem Rosh Chodesh. That's a mitzvah that's addressed to Klal Yisrael. True, the Sanhedrin will actually implement the mitzvah, but only as agents, as shluchim of the tzibur. Another example would be the case of Harigas Mechuyove Mises Bezdin. The Torah says, Ubiarta Rami Kirbecha. We have to destroy and uproot evil. Who's the Torah addressing? You, me? Which individual is obligated in this mitzvah to take someone who's condemned to death and put him to death? It's the judges who sit on the court and have decided that they would rule that this is a, we have enough evidence to establish that this is a capital crime and the person has. So they'll implement, but they're representing Klal Yisrael as Ubayarta Rami Kirbecha. Now, where is this Magen Avraham? That's what I wish I could find. Let me just give it a minute of time. If I don't see it immediately. All right, I'm not going to find it now. I know that in my bones. If anybody wants to look in the earlier pages, it's probably somewhere here on page Mem Gimel. Second. Maybe it's on Mem Zion. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell you where it is. See if this was in a computer program to do a word search. Oh, I found. I was just about to throw it in the towel. Mem Zion on the bottom. So the Gemara thinks that for the sake of building the Beis Hamikdash, we could violate the Shabbos. And the Gemara quotes the Pasuk Ani Hashem Lafuke. Now, what's the case? How do you build a Beis Hamikdash? You might be talking about a case of Gufa de Mitzvah, where he piles one stone on the other. But the Gemara says earlier on our daf, Ovam and Aleph, Lav de Macham. So they're schlepping the stones over to the site, the building site, to build the Beis Hamikdash. And that's a violation of Lav de Macham. So the Aruch LaNer asks the following question. What was the Havamina to say that he should violate the Lotas? Ein esei docha Lotas ela kasher adchia hi be'idna shel kiyama esei. The Khan, the Gemara offers two possibilities. Either he's breaking down a structure, which is called Soser, in order to rebuild it, or he's Milchamer. He says, Adayin lo miskayim esei shel binyan beis hamikdash. Very nicely, he's taking apart a structure in order to free the stones for building material construction, but right now, he's not fulfilling the mitzvah. B'tireis, al pishum masha emi me'amogin Avram, again in Simon Tov Mem Vav, B'shem Rabbeinu Tam. Wow, Mogin Avram's quoting Rabbeinu Tam. She'esei shel Rabbim docha lochaseh afilu shelo be'idna. Imagine what's going on here. We're building the Beis Hamikdash. Who's obligated to build it? Me, you, who? It's Klal Yisrael. Those who are actually involved in the building, they are shluchim of Klal Yisrael. So that mitzvah overrides a losas, even shelo be'idna. Azay state Mogin Avram. You and I never would have said that in a million years. And he gives an example. Abol lachtot shofar, they l'kayim bo mitzvah shofar, Adin, by she'idacha isur hachituv, afilu shelo be'idn, mishum shemitzvah shofar esei duram. Okay, this Rabbi is not what I thought. It pays to go back to the original, then you find out that you're on the wrong track. I mean, shofar is a chomas yachid, it's not a chomas tzibur. Nobody's representing me. I'm blowing my own shofar or hearing my own shofar. He says that shofar is an esei durab. And binyan beis hamikdash surely is an esei durab, and therefore it should override a losasa even if it's shelo be'idn. So if you take a look in footnote number Pei Vav here on page Memches, the first footnote on the page, he says that the Aruch LaNer explains the Magen Avraham. Batam, what's the reason? Esei shel shofar, mikra esei shel rabin, af shekol yochid v'yochid mitzuba bo. Not an esei shel rabin. Here, with Magen Avraham, sham. Shatamu mishum shahayochid motzias harabin yidei chovasa. Not everyone is blowing the shofar. One person is blowing the shofar on behalf of the tzibur. See, if he was talking about what we call tchiyas de me'umot, I'll say brachas, I would understand it very well, because the shliach tzibur is reciting Shmona Esrei, and the tokeya is integrating the tkiya on behalf of the entire tzibur into the Shemon Esrei. But as far as tefillas to be Yushav is concerned, what difference does it make if each person blows the shofar for himself, or one person blows the shofar for everybody else? Why does that upgrade the mitzvah of shofar? With all due respect, say the Rab, and it overrides a lo even shalom be'id. I'm tempted to think, I mean, it's pretty revolutionary, that the Magen Avraham understood that even in the case of Tkiyos the Miyushav, in addition to the Kiyum Yachid, is a Kiyum Tzibur. If I blow the shofar for myself, that's fine. Yotze the mitzvah of shofar. Right? Yom Shru Yelach, I fulfilled that. But I still have an additional mitzvah that I can fulfill if I'm part of a tzibur that's blowing the shofar as one entity of a tzibur. What I'd like to do, but I don't want to take the time now, is a rush in Psachim, in the first parak of Psachim, that discusses the difference between an Asay the Rabbim and an Asay the Yachid in terms of the Nusach HaBracha. And the Nusach HaBracha changes from Lamed to Al. So I'm wondering if he says anything there about shofar. I mean, I would assume that all the Rishonim held that a shofar is a Chovas Yachid. Now I'm wondering out loud, according to the logic of the Magen Avraham, a mitzvah like Megillah on Purim would fit the same profile, because there's no doubt that I enhance the mitzvah when I read it, when one person reads the Megillah on behalf of everybody else. It's very bad when people read it along with it, not only because it might disturb someone. Forget about that. But because you're removing yourself from that kriya of the Rabbah. I'm wondering if the same applies to Haleh. Maybe it's in addition to the Chovas Yachid that you're obligated in Haleh. There's a Haleh of the Tzibur, basis Shel Baruch Hashem. But in Halel, I don't know if we find one Shliach Tzibur who's reciting Halel on behalf of the whole Tzibur. Maybe amongst the Sfaradim there is such a group, I don't know. Interesting, found such a group. Sfiras HaOmer, for example, could be that when we count the Omer together as a Tzibur, it takes on a whole different key. Again, I'm still obligated as a Yachid. I'm on the moon. No one's around. I still have to count Sfira. I don't know exactly how I'll know what day it is. But, or take, for example, it's of Kriyat Shema. Clearly a Chovas Yachid. Is there a Kiyum Tzibur in the midst of Kriyat Shema? This is relevant twice a day. Shachris and Myra. Should you actually time yourself and make sure that you read Kriyat Shema together with the Tzibur? Now, why upgrading the mitzvah, according to the Magen Avraham, to a mitzvah derabim is enough to change and impact on Esed Nochalosis? I don't know. I don't know how that works. The only thing I can think of is that, according to the Magen Avraham, once you have an Esed derabim, you shift the mitzvah from the Ma'aseh mitzvah to the Kiyum mitzvah. Because the Ma'aseh mitzvah is secondary now. The person who actually implements the Ma'aseh mitzvah is just an extended arm of the tzibur. What we try to achieve here is that the mitzvah was fulfilled by the tzibur. So the shofar of the tzibur is a new kind of a shofar. It's able to tuoif whatever it has to do up there, the kisei of Rachman, the kisei din, and all that stuff. It's the rabbin, this has the pasuk say there's a pasuk that reads something to the effect that God never finds the tefillah of the rabbim despicable. Lo yimas kel, So therefore, even though I'm not yet at the point of the violation of the lotus, but the essay carries me over even beyond that. So the Masechet was done at time T1, and the violation of the law was at time T2, but you've defined time T1 by the Masechet. But in the case of a tzibur, a rabbi, forget about the Masechet. Let's look forward to the ultimate kiyum of this, which is the kiyum of the rabbi. Or maybe we could say it a little different, that in a case of a mitzvah de rabbin, you collapse two times into one, meaning it's almost like yesh b'reira l'mafreya. At the moment that she dies, then retroactively, anything necessary in the process that culminated in her death is all part of the mitzvah de rabbin. So shalom would be a problem in a chovas yachid because I did what I had to do at the time of the mitzvah. But when it comes to the rabbin, there's no such thing as you did what you had to do. Nobody's obligated. But rather, whatever you did now will culminate in the kiyum mitzvah, which is achieved when she died. And at that moment, we violate the Issa. Just 1 second. No. It's the other way around. You're violating the law at time T1, and you're kind of the mitzvah at time T2, right? They're burning the lead before the mitzvah. So you've already desecrated the Shabbos by burning the lead. So now what we have to do is you have to take the essay and retroactively, we're going to be mechel the essay on that action, which was preliminary, as if that was part of the essay itself. And again, we can only be so flexible because there's no emphasis on the Masechet. Now on page Nun Beis, he says the following. Lo Rab Yosef, Ikshar Aner, Hare Lefi Techiyazu, Kaimelon She'ein Esei Dochalos HaSheish Paris. V'im Kain, Ve'echrich Yesh Lefarish B'divrei HaBrais L'gabi Kibud, V'lav D'Mecham, Maskonas HaGemara Li'el. So why in the case of Kibud did the Torah tell me not to cook on behalf of my father, when now we're saying that ain't essay dochalosis? But the answer is we're not talking about where the father told him to cook for him, but rather where his father told him to transport the food on the back of the beast, the bird, right on the machamer. If it's far aspires the sibas mashe'ein lemeidim izel kol torku she'ein essay docha b'shum she'ein ela hechshem mitzvah. Mikol makom yesh lumo b'sham l'chol hechshem mitzvah she'ein docha losas. In kein lomatar kro lesar havoras bas koi b'shabbos alo af avora ina ela hechshem mitzvah. Is going back to the spur of hechshem mitzvah. from the fact that the Torah says with regard to Shabbos, Ani Hashem, and I will not violate Mechamer on Shabbos for Kibbur Av, we're going to have to use the Hechsher Mitzvah for the final maskon of that sugya. And therefore, he says in the case of Shrefas Bas Kohen, once again, how could you even apply the principle of Esei Dochalosas? It's only a Hechsher Mitzvah. V'tirates, Im Achen Lo Choya Nemar Isur B'Bas Kohen, Hoylemedim Ikibur L'Kol Torah Kula She'ein Hechsher Mitzvah Dochalosas. El Shelkach Nichtav HaIsur B'Avoras Bas Kohen Kedei Sheyeh Kibur V'Avora Shnei Ksuba Bon Ki Echad She'ein Melamdu. Me'ata Achein Ach Hechsher Mitzvah Dochalosas L'Chol Torah. Dafka B'Shtei Mitzvos Elu Ein Doch. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about Rabbi Yishmael. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yishmael holds Havar L'Lav Yotzes. And Tosfos points out that's impossible because Rabbi Yishmael himself once accidentally violated Havara by tipping the lamb. And he said, I'm going to write down on my ledger that Lovo, Shibana Beis HaMikdash, I'll have to bring a Korban Chatas. Why Korban Chatas if we're holding Havara L'Lav Yotzes? So once again, quoting the Aruch LaNer, Kol HaKusha Eina El Al Shitasam Bebeitza. All right, where in Beitza tells you to look on Daf Chaf Beis. Sheshanidu Sham Hanosem Shemen Bener. If you add oil to a fire, to a lamp, Chayiv Mishumavu. Amistapik Mimenu. If he takes some of the oil out of the candle that's lit, then Chayiv Mishumachav. Tosva Tosus Shechiyuv Eno Mishum Shemamayres HaKibur. He's not Chayiv for Kibur because he's speeding up the process of the combustion of the shemen. Eno H Nichbeis Miyat. The Ein Zel Gram Kibur. The Ein Agram Asur B'Shabbos El Min Rabbanim. Right, so we're trying to figure out how he's Chayiv Korban Chatas. Ella, Yuvahu Mishum Shebenetilas Hashemen Me'aner Nechlash Oro Miyat. Wow, I wonder if that could be proven based on physics. As soon as you remove some of the shemen in the ner, the light is diminished. V'nimtza ki mechabahu b'miktzas es ha'or. Okay, I still don't understand how that's going to get us out of this pickle over here. Ve'arosh hochiach lo k'divreya mimash shaninu b'Shabbos. She'osur listapek mishemen sheb'shoferes hamanatefes l'toch haner. Not sure if that's a dorais, I'm not sure. But he says, Varesham Vare Inu Achishes or Haner. Oh, I see. You know what a shofar is, Rabosai? Shoferes is like a half of an egg. You empty out the egg, you left with the shell, and basically you put the oil in the eggshell and you hang it up in such a way that it's got a little hole underneath and it drips. So that there's no way you could say that if he takes out the shemen from the shoferes, that immediately the light is going to diminish. I mean, you're only stopping the fuel from feeding the fire. If there's a nair that's lit and here's the shemen and I take some of the shemen out, again, I don't hear it yet, but you could hear that he's now immediately diminishing the light, and that's Hebrew. But if he takes the shemen out of the shoferes, I mean, there's still dripping going on, right? The shoferes is no longer full; it's half full, but the half is still dripping down. So you can't say that there's an immediate impact. That look, the light diminished. Arei vaday eno makrish oraner. I think the word sham here means by extracting some of the oil in the shoferes, you're not being machish the oraner. Why? Because kol's machlo notaf Hashem l'toch haner ein zeh mashpia klal al ora. I don't know how to work out all the words here, but basically I think he's saying what we said before. You're not weakening the R because the shemen is still dripping down. He hasn't completely cut off the oxygen, if you know what I mean. In other words, initially, by the way, this is all the issues about Shabbos clocks and all that stuff. Whether you're allowed to make it go out earlier, or stay on longer. They all really come down to what we're discussing here. He's saying that we have an Isa called Gorem Lemayer Lechabos Esaner, meaning the Ner has X volume of Shem that's feeding it. We can predict that the Ner will remain lit for another 5 hours. When he reduces the amount of Shem that's going into the Ner is now not going to last for 5 hours. It's going to only last for 3 hours, let's say. So that's called Gram Lemayer Eskibui Haner. Gram kibui. So this kind of gram kibui, where you cut off some of the oxygen that's feeding the fire, is only the rabbanim. It's not kibui daraisa because there's no immediate impact on the ner, on the or. And the chacham will be matir gram kibui b'makom sheino osa peula b'davra dolet. El b'davra shemichutz lo kigon lahamid mayim lifnei adleika yidei yichbua l'kshetagil l'mkoma. So if you do something extraneous to the ner and it will cause kibui, that's not awesome. So you could actually set up water here, and when the fire reaches that water, it's going to extinguish. That's called a dover shemichutzalo. Right? He's not taking something that's feeding the ner. He's setting up, so to speak, a blockage extraneous to the ner, such that when the ner reaches and hits up against that blockage, when it's water, it's going to be extinguished. That's not called gram kibu. Avoligram esakibu ayidei silukat shemen or apsila. He has three categories here, three cases. He's got a chiv kibui when he takes some of the oil out of the nair as the nair is lit, which means there's an immediate impact of niyut ha'or. That's called gram kibui niskaya. Then he has a second case where he takes the oil out of the shpoferis that's feeding the nair. That's a gram kibu because it's going to extinguish in 3 hours instead of lasting for 5 hours. And that's also midrabanan under gram kibu. Then he's got a further case, which is mutter. It's not even also midrabanan under gram kibu, where he causes the extinguishing of the fire by setting up something extraneous to the nair. It's not even attached to the nair. It's not feeding the nair. And he sets up a barrel of water, and that's going to cause the extinguishing. That's the Rabban. So we have these three levels. So therefore, Afa Toya Saner Yesh Lechayev Mishum Mechaber. Second. Aval ligro mesakibui al yedei siluk shemen o apsila ayotzu sabaya. Reiv chai mishum mechaber imsil mitvara. Ach ba'atoya saner yesh lechayev mishum mechaber. Atoya saner yesh lechayev mishum mechaber. So if I understand correctly, just give me a nod of approval if you can appreciate together with me the structure of what we're trying to accomplish here. The Gemara is offering a possibility that Rabbi Yishmael holds like Rabbi Yossi, that Avar L'chalik Yotzis, meaning that Avar is not one of the 39 malachos, but the Gemara says Rabbi Yishmael was Mates Aner, and as a result, he was Chayav Akar Mechatos. That's what he wrote down in his legend. But now we're holding like Rabbi Yossi. So I think what he's answering, again, just the structure of it, I don't have the details yet, is that what Rabbi Shmuel wrote down in his Pinchas is not that he's chayiv from meleches mavir, because havar l'lavir, but from meleches mechaber. And we're trying to see if somehow what Rabbi Shmuel did was a violation of meleches mechaber. So if I get your nod of approval, at least if that's what the structure is here. Because if you look 5 lines up on the right column, before the end of the column, he writes, Sha'af ba'toya saner, yesh l'chayva mishum mechaber. Do you see that? 5 line on the right column on Nun. We're all on Nun base, right? 5 lines up on before the end of the right column. You see such a thing?
Yeah.
He says, "Sha'af ba'atoyas haner yesh lechayev mishum mechaber," which I think is an interpretation, a brand new interpretation of Rabbi Shmuel, who says that I'm chayv achatos because I was mates haner, and we assume that mates haner means that he's chayv mishum mavir, which can't be reconciled with our Gemara that identifies Rabbi Shmuel as with Rabbi Yossi, that avor l'lavia. It's not a chiv chatas, only a separate lav. But now he's shifting it over to mechaber. What would that?
No, when I made the copy.
So if I tell you the first word, doesn't it really help you? How about if I tell you the last word? Yeah, well, the last word is mishum, but it appears a few times, but 5 lines up from the bottom. Now he quotes a Rashi in Masechet Shabbos, Daf Yud Aleph. That's actually the sugi, if I'm not mistaken, of Rabbi Shmuel, who wrote in his ledger that he's chayv achatos. Shechiyuv mavir v'hatoya umishum shemevius hashemen lepi hapsila val yidei kach idalekes yofa yosef. Okay, fine. That's not going to help me. L'das harosh v'nidav kisa may achashu magdil es hashal heves hareu memayr b'kach es hakibur. Wow, this is mind-boggling. So again, I don't know how much this is going to help us on the punch shed the light here on our sugyas here in Masechet Yevamot, but it's fascinating unto itself. I mean, it's hard to believe if I were to wake you up and say to you that by raising and intensifying the flame, you violate Meches Machaber. You would laugh me out of you'd throw me out. How can you say such a thing? That's Meleches Mavi. But read the words. I mean, I didn't write the text, so you can't blame me. But he says that L'das HaRosh, you see that the last 2 lines on the right column, Meidach Kisminim on the other side of the fence, May Achashu Magdil Es Hashal Heaven, Areu Memayer B'Kachas HaKibur. Ulefize, Yitochin Shesover Rabbi Shmuel, Shavar L'Lav Yotzis. He wrote down his ledger that he's chayav achatos. Lo kosa mishum avara el mishum kibur. Oh, so at least I was justified in the structure that I presented. I didn't have the details worked out, but at least I had the structure. What the Aruch LaNer is trying to do based on the rush is answer Tosafos' kasha. Tosafos' kasha assumes the premise that Rabbi Shmuel wrote himself achatos because he violated Meleches Mavi. How can we reconcile that with Rabbi Yossi? And the Gemara now lines up Rabbi Shmuel with Rabbi Yossi that havar l'chalikas. It's not even a law. It's not even a malacha. And the Aruch LaNer finds a rush, and according to the rush, what Rabbi Shmuel was chayav achatos for was not meleches mavir, but meleches machaber. And there's no such thing as machaber l'laviyos. Machaber is undeniably one of the 39 malachas. Now, how could it possibly be that by intensifying the fire, you violate meleches machaber? And the answer is that if you do anything to touch the nair, that would cause the nair to get extinguished earlier, instead of 5 hours down the line, it'll go out in 3 hours. That's called a violation of meleches machaber. Again, if you do it from a distance and you extract and diminish the oil in the troferes, that's the rabbanon. That's gram kibui the rabbanon. Again, it's going to go out after 3 instead of 5 hours. But you didn't touch anything in the nair itself. And if you put up a barrel of water, that's not even ground kibu d'rabbanan. Here, the hatayas haner, what he does is, like, let's say the fire is here, right, with the wick, so there's fire here. Now he tips the oil in such a way that this fire intensifies because he can't see the page that he's reading. And without thinking, that's what Rabbi Shmuel did. Now what happens is the flame shoots up. The nair, meaning the oil in the nair, is going to last only 3 hours instead of 5 hours. Why? Because as long as the shalhevis is very weak, it's only sucking up and combusting the oil at a very slow rate. It can keep going for 5 hours. But paradoxically, when you tip the oil over and the flame goes up, the oil is going to very quickly extinguish. Burnt, right? It's being burnt up. What's it called? Faster. It's going to burn faster. It's not going to last a full 5 hours. And now you're tampering with the air itself. You're not extracting from the shofar. And therefore, you violate Meleches Machava. Because any time that you diminish the amount of time that the candle is going to be lit, if you do it as a gram kibui in the chefts of the ner, then you're chayav mishum meleches machava. So Rabbi Shmuel wrote down in his ledger. I mean, the archaeologists are going to have to find that ledger for us. And we're going to look at the ledger and to see what did Rabbi Shmuel inscribe on that ledger. Did he say, I'm bringing a chatas from meleches mavir or from meleches machava? And the Archelaner is going to argue that when the archaeologists find his ledger, they'll find that he wrote himself a note that he was violating Meleches Machava, not Meleches Mavir, because he, Rabbi Shmuel, holds like Rabbi Yossi that Avar L'chalam. Took me a while to catch on. Once I chap that we're trying to shift the chiyuv here from Mavir to Machava, then the piece of the puzzle began to fit into place. Now, let's talk about Misas Bezdin. The Gemara always assumes here that forget about Meleches Mevashel and Mavir as you prepare the psilos to put this woman to death. The very fact that you kill the woman, that itself is violation of Netilas Nisham. Hikshu Tosfos, Kevan Shin, Ketzad Nitan Lesar, Etzem Misas Bezdin, Shul. Lo Savaru Eish Halo Ein Kosuv Zeh Malamdenu El Alisa Avara Bishu. Enam Ela Hechsher Mitzvahs Vahumas Bilva. I will involve Kaim Mitzvahs Vahumas Atzmo. Gon Shekvar Hoysap Silo Mevushelas Me'er Shabbos or Mechuyove Sayef Echenek Shas Malokli Ve'etzem Netilas Nishmaso. Minayin Lonu Sha'af Misosam. So maybe this is what we saw before, the name of Tosas. Maybe the reason why it's not Docha Shabbos in the case of the Psila is because that Psila is only a Hekshen mitzvah. Maybe the Netilas Nisham itself would be permissible. For example, if he had already prepared the hot molten lead before Shabbos, or in the case where there's no preliminary stage necessary, and on Shabbos you're just simply murdering the, I should say murder because it's a great mitzvah. We called it a mitzvah of tikkun ha'olam. You're putting the criminal to death. So perhaps in such a case, one could argue that to put someone to death, just by simply taking a sayif or by chenek, if they prepared everything before Shabbos, then if the malacha is the Netilas Neshama, maybe in such a case we're not dealing with the Hechshem mitzvah, we're dealing with the mitzvah itself of Netilas Neshama, which is also the malacha of Netilas Neshama. How do we know it's not Docha Shabbos? Iterates shebechol makom anu machshirei mitzvah she'efshel asosa me'erev Shabbos kim mitzvah atzma. This sounds like either Masechet Shabbos or Masechet Beitza. Ein Ches. Oh, very good. Now, I don't understand why they couldn't prepare the molten lead on Erev Shabbos. He says, "V'yav kad behechri shemduba she'efshar levashel sapsila me'erev Shabbos." I have no clue why. Again, he always gives us a conceptual without working out the engineering of it. I don't know why this is impossible.
You have to keep it.
Keep it on the fire. No, a low flame. I mean, you might be in violation of what's called shehiyah. That's the Rabbanah. You're not allowed to leave food on an open fire. I don't think that would apply to lead.
Because it's the same reason. If the lead melts at, so if it's starting to go down, you're going to want to stir up the fire.
So call it a Rabbanah. But certainly on a derisive level, he's not violating any Easter if he just removes it from the fire. Okay. So what I want to do, just the last 5 minutes, is we'll put this on the side and let's see where we're up to in the Gemara. We're on Daf Zayin Amud Beis. We're trying to justify the word Aleha as a havamina that Yibum would override the erva of Achos Ishtar. So we're up to Ella Salkedaita Amina, which is, where is it? Second. Ella. So you see 5 lines, 1 second, from the top, let's count that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 7 lines down from the top. The first one line is Harayos. I just found out last night that there is a certain kind of a very sophisticated chef's hamburger that's called Arayos. I was in shock. But it's not spelled exactly the same way. Anyway, it sounded evil. Ella says, Marsal Kedat Kamina Tesi Mamemotsinu Me Ashes Ach. Ma Ashes Ach. Mi Yaba Afachos Isha Tisyamem. In other words, we're going to use what's called a binyan ach. The Torah says that we override a lot of the erva of Ashes Ach for the sake of the mitzvah of Yibum. Now we're going to equate all the other arayos to Ashes Ach. And that's called a binyan ach. So for that, we need Olel. The Gemara rejects it. If she's only an Ashes Ach, it's not your wife's sister, and you're the Yavam, so that's fine. It's the wife of your brother. But the Torah says that we're Mater Ashes Ach. So you can go ahead and be the Yavim. But if you add another Erva, she's also the wife of your sister, right? When 2 brothers marry 2 sisters. So how do you know that the mitzvah of Yibum would apply? Morietz is mal the tema if you didn't have a leha, hoil, the ishtere. Once the Torah was matir the Yisrael's af, then the Torah would be matir achos isha as well, and all other Yisrael arayas. But the interesting thing is, mal the tema hol the ishtere, that's just the svara. And that svara is going to be matir and isra veishas of achos ishto. I mean, that's very different. So the Gemara actually raises that objection. Where do you find such a thing? I'm reading a whole Ishtre. That once the Torah was matir one Easter, you can pile on another Easter, and the Torah meant to be matir both Easter. Maybe the Torah wants it to be matir one Easter, not a second Easter. Why is such a havam? So in order to answer this question, we'll have to do next week. The Gemara is going to introduce a sugya of mitzora, and it's a case where the mitzora is also balkari, and the Torah is going to allow the mitzora to enter into the azara for the purpose of his tara. And once the Torah allowed him to enter in, even though he's Tomei B'tumas Mitzora, we can add another Easter here, and he's a carrier. He's a balkari as well. Besides being a Mitzora, he happens to be a balkari. This guy's got all the strikes against him. And once the Torah allows him to override the Tumas Mitzora and enter into the Azar for the purpose of Taras Mitzora, the Torah is going to allow him to enter into the Azar, even though he's Tomei B'tumas carry, which is another violation of entering into the Azar. And that's based on the principle, Hoil the Ishtre Ishtre. That once the Torah for a certain purpose is going to allow you to violate an Avera, then it'll allow you to violate it even if you pile up the second Avera. So if the Torah was Mata Yibum in the case of Ashes Achim, then we can go as far, Hol Vishta Isha, be Matir, even Achos. And for that, I need a Leah, Afuke, to tell me that's not so. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop. By the way, this principle, Hoil Vishtre Ishtre, is a world-class principle in Shah. We're really touching on some heavy issues. Okay, then.